Just a quick overview. Tonight's meeting really represents an opportunity for us to share some sort of recent updates and some concepts with you. It also, in many ways, represents a kickoff of community engagement, seeking neighborhood feedback over the next couple of weeks. In fact, the next 2 weeks, as we continue to proceed with this this exciting project at Hillside Park. Boy, a little bit before we jump into the agenda tonight, I guess a couple of housekeeping rules. Welcome to the virtual environment. I think we're all somewhat familiar with this. If you have questions as we get to the question and answer phase, you can do one of two things. You can either just mention question or comment in the chat box. A note about the chat box, if you open that up, you'll see you should have a scroll down option to be able to make sure everyone sees that. So you make sure everyone is listed there and just say, comment or question. You can also raise your virtual hand if you've got a comment or a question as well, if that chat box isn't working for you. Another thing I want to note is tonight's meeting is being recorded. So just be not only aware of that, but certainly gives us opportunity to go back and sort of review our notes and review conversation, but also make sure tonight's presentation is available for others who might not have been able to attend tonight. So I mentioned this earlier, but the presentation slides were, I think, made available to many of you, to any of you that are on the project distribution list last night. Just again, a point of emphasis as we go through these concepts and these ideas tonight, we are not expecting only response and feedback tonight. This is really going to be feedback we're seeking over the next couple of weeks. As I said earlier, that includes an opportunity for some on-site conversation coming up this Thursday. I'll touch base on that. We'll talk a little bit more about the details of that later on in the meeting. I think we're all aware COVID is around us, and so there's some precautions that we're going to want to sort of have in place and make sure everyone's aware of as we plan to have those opportunities to have conversations on site on Thursday. So given we've got a lot to cover, why don't we jump right in? You're going to have a chance to meet the teams, the staff and the consultant team as we go through these conversations. So rather than doing a round of introductions now, I certainly invite everyone to introduce themselves as we jump into the presentation. Next slide. Just going to quickly cover tonight's agenda. 4 points that we want to have a chance to cover. First, sort of going through what we heard primarily last year. As many of you have been involved in this project, know we had multiple conversations throughout last year. We then want to cover the update on the wetland and the playfield situation. As you all know, last summer, this is a very unique challenge that came our way with this project. We've been doing some work following feedback and discussions last summer. We've been doing quite a bit of work this winter through the raining season to better understand water flows and how water flows through the site and that playfield. Eliza is here from Herrera Environmental to share some of those mitigation thoughts, as well as share some of the drainage options. Following that, we'll talk through trail connectivity, share some of the concepts that we have that we feel will address some of the existing conflicts that exist with people walking through the cemetery, but how we might improve trail function, improve sort of that relationship with the cemetery and trail needs on the west side of the park. And then lastly, the team from Methuen will take the chance to walk through some concepts for play and how we can incorporate play into this park all the while we're really seeking to preserve the natural setting, the peaceful setting, the beauty of the park that I know through our feedback last year is not only imperative to you as a neighborhood, but certainly imperative to us as a Parks Department. Next slide. So highlighting a little bit of sort of what the path we took to get to this point, focusing primarily on some of the conversations last year, but I'd be remiss to not highlight really a lot of the origins of this conversation, and the origins of this interest in this project really came from 2014 and a series of meetings that the department had with the neighborhood around improvements, needs that the neighborhood was seeing at the park, items including just improved maintenance, but also trail functionality, play field drainage. A number of these things really came out of those conversations. Fast forward then to 2021, in the midst of a pandemic. We restarted those conversations in February with a virtual community meeting. We then had an online community survey that many of you took part in, and so appreciate. Those meetings really, I think, helped to highlight I think the strong difference of opinion of what play could look like or should look like in the park, or whether a playground should even be added to this park. That then really greatly informed the conversations we had in June, both in terms of a community meeting and then an on-site open house on really, if we are to incorporate play, how do we do that in a balanced fashion? How do we do that in a way that certainly meets the need of families in the neighborhoods that surround Hillside Park, but do it in a way that is again respectful to the feel and the aesthetics of that park. We then also had an on-site open house. It's at these June meetings that we really shared the news that as we looked for what the issues and the cause of some of the drainage needs and drainage issues in the field were, that there was a discovery that we were dealing with a Class 3 wetland. And so that June meeting and the on-site visit, we spent a lot of time talking about preferences and neighborhood preferences, whether it is retaining that 40-plus-year-old use of that play field as a field and a recreation space, and what that would mean in terms of mitigation needs for the wetland. That led to a park board conversation that we had out on site, a park board meeting in July. Again, really appreciated the neighborhood attendance we had there. It's at that meeting that a lot of discussion led to how to balance and how to prioritize, and really the preference that the neighborhood had towards retaining function of that play field, making sure function of that play field stayed in place, and really set the direction for how we proceed with this work, understanding that priority of the neighborhood to retain the field, and really set into motion the work that we did this winter that you'll hear more from Eliza as well as the Methuen team. Next slide. So in those conversations, these bullets are not, again, intended to be an all-inclusive list of every single word or phrase that we heard, but some of the common threads, the main threads, the main themes that we heard from you, as I mentioned earlier. Retain function of the play field. That is a much loved space. That field represents such a great opportunity for diverse play that as a neighborhood, as a community, that was a priority to you. The goal to enhance trail connectivity along the west side of the park in this phase of the project was a real priority as well. Removing that conflict with the cemetery in terms of neighbor neighbors wanting access or to walk to the park to do so in a way that doesn't have to walk through the cemetery or disrupt the um, really the use of that space as a cemetery. We also heard, as I mentioned earlier, a real mixed response to adding play amenities. In fact, when you look at the survey, roughly 55% of the respondents wanted some degree of play, whether it was a large amount of play, a medium amount of play, or a small amount of play, while a full 45% of the respondents didn't want any play at all and wanted to preserve the park or keep the park as it was. Um, that really represented I think, an important element of how we approached our work this winter and how we're trying to approach what we're going to present tonight. And that's how to find a balanced solution and not turn this into a all or nothing type approach, but how could play be introduced into this neighborhood park to create that diversity of a public neighborhood park, but do it in a way that really respects um, um, the nature, the history, the setting that is Hillside Park. Some, in terms of some other just items that really help to inform our work in terms of those that were interested in play. There was a really desire that it be low impact, both visually and aesthetically, as I sort of highlighted just now. Also, we asked a question, if you remember, about is there interest or preference for play amenities to be dispersed throughout the park or more concentrated in one or two locations? The one or two locations was more of the preference than dispersed. In terms of types of play, not surprising, climbing, swinging, sliding were all of high interest for those that wanted play. Um, Also, opportunities for adventure play, using natural materials, play that doesn't necessarily always involve running, yelling, screaming, but what does quiet play look like with just with nature and other types of play? Another priority we heard was inclusiveness. Make sure not only the play opportunities have an inclusive element to it, but the park itself. How are we looking at both access, sitting, and other just uses, inclusive uses of the park space? So, as I said, these are really some of the bigger themes and threads that came from you that really help to inform what you're going to see tonight. It's our sincere hope, not only as we get feedback tonight, but as your feedback tonight helps to inform sort of what we hope is a preferred concept. But it's our hope in this work that these concepts you'll see tonight and the concepts that we move towards really reflect some element of what your feedback was. So as you provided feedback, we hope you see that reflected in some of the work tonight. So with that, I believe next slide is going to be a transition to Eliza. So I'm going to go on mute and invite Eliza to share a little bit about our playfield and wetland situation. Take it away, Eliza.
Hi there, I'm Eliza Spear. I work with Herrera Environmental Consultants, and we were doing site investigations for critical areas within the proposed project area. And we identified a Category 3 wetland where we all have seen the water collects at the baseball field during the winter. So since identifying this wetland, we've written a critical areas report to document those conditions. And through that reporting process, we identified that the wetland has a 75-foot wetland buffer in accordance with the City of Issaquah code. So you can go to the next slide. A Category 3 wetland is considered a moderately functional wetland. A lot of people think that a mode wetland is always a incredibly low scoring wetland. That would be a Category 4, which is the lowest scoring wetland. But these wetlands actually fall in the moderate category more often because despite having low habitat functions, they do serve as a location to store water and filter that water as it infiltrates into the ground while it sits in the wetland. So that is part of wetlands ecosystem functions, and that is why this wetland comes out as a moderately functioning wetland and has that buffer I already mentioned. Since identifying the wetland, we've been working with the city to coordinate with the regulatory agencies that might be interested in this wetland and have jurisdiction over the permitting process associated with any potential impacts to this wetland that would be caused by the park improvements. That has included the United States Army Corps of Engineers, Washington Department of Ecology, and the city of Issaquah. And with those regulatory agencies, we've been talking about preferred mitigation methods because there are likely to be impacts to this wetland through the process of improving drainage and improving play within the park. So we want to make sure that we're mitigating for the loss of those ecosystem functions completely and in accordance with the regulations. The city is also exploring costs of mitigation based on the feedback from those regulatory agencies. So each regulatory agency has their own specific perspective on the mitigation approach. And so from there, the city is exploring what is, affordable and in compliance with those regulations. You can go to the next slide. So an engineer at Herrera, who I'm just chiming in for today, is working on a field drainage improvement plan. So the city had a geotechnical study conducted to understand how water moves through these soils and how the soils themselves, what they're comprised of, and how that influences the way water moves through the site. And that geotechnical report then informed us in finding some possible solutions to reduce that standing water in the play field during the wet season. So the options Herrera came up with were to install a curtain drain around the perimeter of the field, since the water does collect sort of by home plate. Installing a curtain drain around the perimeter would likely provide somewhere for that water to go and make the play field more usable and prevent that saturation throughout the year. There's also an option to do a partial regrading of the field and backstop area to improve the slope. And then that would also include adding topsoil when regrading. That would have a higher infiltration capacity so that water is less likely to sit. And then that would result in restoring all disturbed areas to usable turf grass for general recreational purposes. So it's likely that one or both of these options or a combination of these options may be pursued as part of the project to make this field more playable for folks in the neighborhood. That's it for this one.
I would like to take a pause if we could go back one slide and open it up for any Q&A on the wetland playfield and kind of where we're at. Eliza's going to have to take off for this evening, and so if anyone has any questions they would like to ask her at this point, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or put question in the chat and I will call on you. We have Connie Marsh. Connie?
So I'm Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk, and I read the geotech report. And then, I went and read the stormwater manual again because I just love reading the ecology stormwater manual. And I even read the 2014 and the 2019 one because we're changing, right? I wanted to see the difference. So it's clear that we have difficulties putting a lot of water on the slopes provided. We have a water situation already in our cemetery downslope. So We also have to maintain the existing hydrology for the trees, which have been having a heck of a time staying alive in these drought conditions and the higher temperatures that we have been seeing. So, from what I see here, it is hard to imagine how the pre-existing drainage is actually being supported with basically I'm going to call it a level spreader just for fun. That's the blue line. And then potential sloping of the surface, but you aren't going to be changing the sloping of the underlying till, which basically is creating the bathtub for the system. So can you explain to me better how those functions would be maintained in your proposal?
So Connie, I'll say from the top that the drainage improvement is not my area of expertise, but I can fill you in on what I discussed with our engineer, who is the primary lead for this work and is very experienced in complying with the stormwater manual. So I'm certain that the plan that the city will come up with will comply with the stormwater manual. But essentially the plan is to, if we just regraded and left the till in place, you're right, that would lead to water just, it would infiltrate into the top layer that had been affected, but then it would still have the same bathtub effect. So the idea with the curtain drain is to allow that water to actually go somewhere and be dispersed into the northern forest, as shown on the markup here. And then going into the northern forest, the flow would be controlled and dispersed in a way, and a complete analysis would occur prior to the installation of that system to make sure that no problematic flows are caused by that rerouting while still achieving the function of restoring the playfield use.
So I don't want to make everyone crazy by going through the steep slope component of this and the downstream flood existing conditions of the cemetery. So maybe somebody can hook me up with your engineer. When you say curtain drain, does this mean you are going to grade down and make the field slope so that all of the water tilts back toward, I'm going to use the word backstop because that's where the backstop is. And you are going to be collecting the water by stopping the flow of water from going to the forested slopes in the outfield. Because it's hard to, it's hard to understand how that is going to collect the water when the water collects in the outfield.
The majority of the water collects at the backstop, is my understanding.
No,
I know that water does happen.
Okay.
I know that water does collect in the outfield, but I can tell you from my biological evaluation of the site that it does not collect in the outfield for the same duration or intensity as it does at home plate in the backstop area.
And we generally believe, Connie, that when the water in the outfield hits that till layer below, that till layer is likely sloping towards home plate. So the water to really regrade that subsurface level would require a very significant grading effort to tip everything towards the outfield. Whereas we would let that water get to home plate and then move it out with those drains and disperse into the forest. And just to add on to the dispersion piece, in talking with our folks at Herrera, that the location of that is intended to sit on a particular contour that will disperse it away from the hills, the cemetery, and be a safe distance from the steep slope buffers. So we haven't exactly set it in place yet, but that is the intent. We do believe we have the right location for it based on our understanding of the current topography.
And Tony, I would also like to just add, these are concepts right now. They're not final plans at this time.
As I said, rather than waste everyone's time on my retentive geotech and water goes where you don't want it to conversation. Maybe I can talk to the engineer and he can try to persuade me that he can control the flow of water to that extent. Would that be possible?
Connie, you send me an email and we'll
Okay.
chat. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover tonight. So
I
thank
know,
you for
that's
your
what I'm
question.
trying not, I'm really trying not to dive into something that I think is incredibly crucial.
Yes, no, and we appreciate your comments, truly. Anyone else that has a question at this time, or are we ready to move on? Okay, thank you, Connie.
Saw a question from Brad. Look, I think I saw a hand up. Got a hand up, Brad?
Thank you. I must have missed it. Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Caitlin?
actually, I just wanted to see if somebody could just clarify a point that Connie made about the impact on trees. There's a rather substantial, really nice grove of cedar trees there, and I wanted to see if removing water from that area would have any impact on them.
We did have an arborist study done on the park as part of this preparatory work. And the arborists have reviewed this plan and don't anticipate any negative impacts on the cedar grove. The drip line of those cedars is well outside of the area in question for this. So I don't anticipate that they get a significant portion of their hydrologic inputs from this particular spot.
Thank you.
And I see we have a hand up from Caitlin.
Hi, yeah, sorry, this is just hopefully a pretty simple question. And thanks for explaining all this. It's really helpful to see kind of presented in this way. But my question is just, what is a curtain drain? Is this like a ditch that's then kind of retained throughout the field, the edge of the field, or is it covered as a drainage? Like, I don't really understand what that would look like. I guess just trying to visualize.
It is a covered drain. Yeah, it wouldn't be just open at the surface. It's covered and it's constructed in a way so that the above ground land use, like play, would be completely able to happen over the drain.
Yeah, it would look very much like what's there right now, reseeded with grass and totally like irrigation pipes underneath the ground. You wouldn't see them. Okay, I think we caught all the questions on this one. So thank you. Eliza, thank you for joining us tonight. I'll be in touch. And this is on to you, Amelia.
Right. Well, as part of this project, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we are going to be addressing the trail connectivity in this area of the park. So one of the big issues that we know has been a concern for the community for a long time is access to the park through the Upper Hillside Cemetery. So in response, we will be decommissioning these two trail connections that connect to Hillside Park through the main portion of the Upper Hillside Cemetery. And a new neighborhood nature trail will be established through the west side woods of on the west side of the cemetery that will be more respectful of the cemetery space and create a path for neighbors to be able to access the park without having to go through the cemetery. In addition to that, a new accessible trail route will be established from the Mount McKinley Drive entrance. So this trail will allow access for all to the picnic area that's existing, to the field, and to all of the new amenities. And we'll look at that trail a little bit more closely later in the presentation, but this will be a low visual impact trail that will be made of stabilized gravel. And we're really excited to be able to provide access for all into the park. And then we spent a long time in our last couple of community meetings last year talking about our site analysis and the different buffers that we're working within to make sure that we maintain some acoustic buffer for the cemetery uses, as well as a really generous buffer for residential areas away from the edges of the site to make sure that all potential activities are going to be contained with a pretty decent distance from anyone's homes. There is also a steep slope setback that comes a little further down here that we've managed to stay fully clear of, so we've left that off of this analysis. And these blue lines again are just those existing trail connections that will connect up to that new trail through the Upper Hillside Cemetery. So if there aren't any questions about the trails, and we will get into a little bit more about the accessible trail from the Mount McKinley entrance, I will go ahead and pass it over to Christian to talk about the play concept.
I do see one question in the chat about the lower, maybe Amelia, if you could go back to the trail map for just a second. Would the lower access trail require cutting down trees?
Yeah, no, we will not be cutting down any trees to create that trail. We are still looking at the details for exactly where that trail will be sited, but everything that you will see in this presentation today is being planned with the most possible care for the existing trees as we possibly can have. We know how important these beautiful old trees are, and we are doing everything we can to protect them. As we've discussed before, there are some trees that have been determined by the arborist to be high hazard trees. Most of them are dead trees with very heavy limbs that could fall and injure somebody. So there may be some selective removal of limbs or dead trees that present extreme hazard, but none of the trees that are healthy and so well loved in this park will be damaged whatsoever.
I would like to add, we had one more comment that I would like to share, and talking about the green trail. This trail is in an established buffer that was agreed to by the cemetery board and property owners. We don't live on the buffer zone, but if we did, we'd object to this. This needs to be planned with the cemetery board and neighbors on that buffer zone. I just want to mention that we have been in communication with the cemetery board regarding this as they open up that upper area for expansion, allowing access through there was part of those concepts. So we look forward to continuing our work with the cemetery board in making this happen and making sure that the buffer, there is a 50-foot buffer between the back of the homes and the cemetery, and making sure we maintain that sense of privacy, but yet also provide neighborhood access through there. So hopefully I answered your question a little bit, and if not, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. Connie, did you have another question?
Yes, I've been watching the cemetery board, interestingly, and I haven't seen that come up in the cemetery board except for Corey pushing it. So it'd be interesting to actually see the official comment by the cemetery board because they're coming out with saying that this is an unofficial trail. It is uncertain who would be responsible for maintenance for that trail, signage, etc. So it is being a friend of Chuck Olson, who lives at the corner, a trail through that buffer was never really an established part of the initial part of that 50-foot buffer in the cemetery. So I think you really need to reach out to those people who live by that buffer and look at the agreement language within the initial legal, because there was an appeal on that whole thing long ago. So it comes with more language than you would think. The other question is, we have do you have a link from the roundabout because sure as shooting, people are going to want to go down the roundabout and then they're going to make their own trail to your little green trail. So you might as well put it in to begin with, because you know it's going to happen whether you want it to or not. So you want it to be in the right spot. Then the question is, why don't you use the almost road-like construct that is already at the end of Mount McKinley to allow people wheelchair and all kinds of access into the park rather than swizzling through the trees there? That just seems like a highly functional, just go straight, and you would have easy and short access into the park by all kinds of people with fewer impacts to the tree roots that we are looking at. So that, and then you could create a trail around the edge of the field for the wheelchair people. To me, that makes a little more sense. I wonder why you're taking the long way when you could have the short way. Thank you.
I can try and answer that, and design team, please feel free to jump in. Taking the long route because it is a requirement that when we play features into a park, that we need to provide that accessible access to those areas. And so in order for us to get grades that meet outdoor recreation standards, we will need to provide the longer route, but this will also then allow people to experience the picnic area and other stops along the way in doing so. Any other questions?
The route of that trail will make more sense as we move into the next section.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. I think we're good to move on. I don't see any further questions here. Thank you.
Hey everybody, so my name's Christian Runge, and I think we met a bunch of you before in the open house and previous meetings. I'm a landscape architect at Methuen, along with Amelia, who's also a designer there. And I also wanted to mention Deb Gunther's here as well. She's the project director for a number of our projects here in Issaquah, joining the conversation here today, listening in, and hoping to join the conversation later as well. So that's our team that have had hands in this thinking along the way and part of the conversation along the way. So we can go to the next slide, Amelia. So I'll start by just giving an overview of the overall concept of circulation and play and gathering within the spaces here at Hillside. And really I want to start off by just highlighting the sort of inspiration concept for us is this idea of a forest frolic, that really we're trying to create a series of spaces that really feel integrated within the existing forest. They use natural materials. They really try to enhance what's already there and expand upon it versus putting something new or foreign. So the idea that we're working with existing topography, including the manipulated topography of the playfield, embankments, as well as some of these really wonderful spaces in and around some of these beautiful groves of trees, trying to take a delicate light touch with that visually and physically. So I'll walk you through the numbers here really quick on this plan. The first is we'll start by talking a little bit about the McKinley entrance, making some improvements there to make it a more welcoming and open entryway. The accessible trail we've talked a little bit about already, but that's really to provide ADA accessible connections from the entrance to several of these little small gathering areas and play spaces. Number 3 is what is already an existing picnic area informally with several picnic tables. We're going to keep that informal sense of picnicking, but we are going to add one accessible picnic table that will be connected to the accessible trail with a more stable surface, so that a wheeled user could get into that space and share in this picnic experience as well. And then moving on to number 4, as you move down towards sloping down the hill, we've started to talk about integrating a toddler discovery play area that's centered around that large boulder out there. That's kind of an iconic little boulder that attracts people of all ages. We think it's an opportunity especially for toddler play, that could be really well connected visually to the picnic area for supervision for families, and really integrate very simple natural elements, no real major climbers or anything like that. Number 5 is on the slope in between the backstop or near the backstop and the embankment. where we just want to take advantage of the existing slope there and make it into an embankment slide with some stepping features to allow kids to go up and down without eroding the slopes. We'll show you some images of that in a second. And then one of the other sort of main play area is out in right field. And this would feature a low-lying log climber and a wood swing as well in that level space outside of the trees. And then number 7 is what we're calling overlook seating or step area. And really, it's just taking advantage of that slope down to the clearing surrounded by maples. It's kind of an eroded trail there because it's so steep. So we want to reinforce that trail with steps and then allow off of those steps a couple spots to stop and sit and really take in that beautiful environment and visually versus actually going down there and having play elements. So it's really a space to pause and take in that environment. And then lastly, the backstop itself, we do want to circle back to this question of the backstop. If we're going to be improving the play field, what do we do with it? Is this something we want to keep, or is this something we want to leave out of the play field and leave it as a more natural space? So on to the next slide, I'll just briefly run through some of the details of some of these spaces we were just looking at. The first is the entry. And as I mentioned before, the main idea here is that maybe we're going to be removing the chain link fence that's there, putting in bollards to keep vehicles out, but making a more open and welcoming entrance that would connect to this accessible trail that you can see here is really a trail that basically will look like a trail, but have a little bit firmer surface for wheeled users. It'll make it a lot easier for the parks to maintain as well and connect over to the accessible play and picnic. You can see that the picnic tables are all in generally the same area where they're kind of located now. We would have that additional ADA picnic table, and it would be on that ADA surface. And I think really what's important to note about this view is like from this entrance, the play areas and elements that we're proposing are hardly visible. What we're really thinking is some elements that are very low profile, that are well integrated, low profile, that are really blend into the landscape and aren't particularly visible from this location. So we can go to the next slide, please. Just a couple actual photo examples of what a stabilized trail looks like. They tend to mix in some of the native soils that are nearby so that it really feels like a trail, but it just has a little more firmness to it. It can have an edging that's much more blended, or can use some rocks or other stable surfaces to kind of create an edge. In our case, in the forest environment, it'll probably be a little bit more blended. You can see the idea that we would bring in a few more newer, long-term, more durable picnic tables for use in this space as well. And then maybe opportunities for other amenities at the entrance that would be improved, such as signage or recycling and new trash receptacles. Go to the next slide, please. The next area we're going to look at is the Discovery Toddler play area. And so you can see on the left image where that view is taken. It's just to the left of, it's still within the Cedar Grove, next to the picnic area, looking at that really large boulder, and where that child is jumping off, that's the existing boulder to remain in place, kind of a glacial erratic possibly, or maybe it was moved there during the construction of the field a long time ago. Maybe someone here has the long story on that one, but we thought it was kind of an interesting element, really attractive to build a very simple discovery play space for particularly geared towards little kids, but really open for all ages, obviously, where we might collect a few of the other boulders we saw in the area, bring a few more in and create those opportunities for climbing on rocks or sitting on logs, some loose parts, elements, wood, blocks, branches and other pieces that could be manipulated by children just to play and just to create their own spaces through imagination. And then a simple frame that could be built into a woven nest that creates a little gathering spot for make-believe and play for little children as well, that could provide that sense of being in the trees, being a bird, being in a nest. And then we also think there's some opportunities around the edges to really start to integrate a little bit of restored planting, take advantage of that opportunity, collaborating with Green Issaquah to restore some of the native plants, remove some of the invasive species to kind of make sure that we really have a nice natural soft environment around this particular space. The accessible trail would connect to this and then weave its way down the hill. We can go to the next one, please. And oh, sorry, go back one. Sorry, Amelia. There's one other thing I want to mention about this. This space doesn't have any true climbers or any play equipment, so it would not have any of the fall requirements or fall material surfaces. So this would be just a natural forest floor of soil. It would have the duff and the other materials that are coming in and out, but it's not a developed surface, except for what kids do to it. So this gives you a couple other examples of the existing conditions here with the existing boulder, the opportunities for some of these natural materials just to create a little bit of a framework for kids to play and discover in a space that's adjacent to the picnic areas. You get a sense of some of those elements right here. And moving on to the next slide and the main play area. So these are the two spaces that are more developed on the site. And this view is taken from the third baseline, looking back past the backstop to the taller embankment and the cedar grove beyond. You can see in the image on the right, the existing backstop that is in place. The entrance to McKinley is beyond that. And then as you move towards the left, you see the two key play features. The first is the embankment slide that is built into the existing steep slope. It's bound on both sides by either could be wood steppers or boulders. And that's both a play element as well as a way to protect and avoid eroding soils around it. You get a lot of activity, foot activity. It can definitely create a lot of wear and tear on turf. So that space around the slide would have those elements for stepping and protection of the slope. And then at the top of the slide, there'd be a very low profile deck or platform that would both be a space to launch onto the slide, as well as we're considering or looking at the ways that it could wrap around very lightly impacting, but wrapping around the cedar tree there to protect its roots and allow kids to hang out around it, but without disturbing the roots that concentrated use could facilitate. So we're exploring that idea and the right sizing and fitting it, but we think there's a way to kind of allow kids to kind of experience and be close to trees like that, but also protect those important species that we've been talking about so far in this meeting. As you move further to the left, there's a little space along that embankment that creates almost a shallow natural bowl. And we thought this would be just an opportunity. Maybe it's a space we integrate a few log seats to really just enhance it as a sitting and watching space. You can look out across the meadow. You can just hang out and take in the scene, but really in what is already sort of a natural amphitheater. And then that transitions you to the second little play area that features a log climber and a wood swing. And so you can see here that the wood swing is a single base swing with a basket type swing is what we're considering. It has a lot of multi-use that way. It's constructed of two single larger wood posts. So we really feel this will blend very well into the forest environment of cedars and other conifers in the area. And then the log climber is a series of basically a tumble of logs that are built up and constructed that you can climb on top of them. They can integrate nets into them. And if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see what those look like. And on the right-hand image, it's called a log jam sometimes, but the idea, you can tie in a few nets, you can climb over and under it and hang out on it, sit on it. But we really tried to pick something that was really low profile. So from a distance, it really is not taking up a lot of space in your view. But when you're there's something really exciting and interesting as a play element for kids of a wide variety of ages. So you can see those types of stack log elements. An example of that swing up close right there with the wood posts. The idea of low wood steppers, again, integrating those opportunities both on the embankment and within the play area for stepping and jumping and hopping. So these two spaces, the bottom of the embankment slide and this space of the log jam and the swing, would be climbers. And so they do have fall zones, which means they would have the wood fiber mulch surfacing that you often see in a lot of playgrounds. And that would be edged by a mix of natural materials like logs or boulders or wood timbers. And that's at a depth of 12 inches or so to provide the fall protection in those two locations, the bottom of the slide only and the zone around the swing and the log jam. Go to the next slide. And lastly, this is the overlook. So as I mentioned before, this is where the trail drops down into the clearing of really large mature maples. The trail itself is pretty highly used. Obviously, I think everyone's probably been out there, and it takes you down into a beautiful forest environment. It is a bit eroded and maybe needs a little bit of reinforcement. So we thought in the process of maybe providing a series of timber steps that would take you down that slope and protect that slope, and we could enhance it beyond that to create a series of seat steps also made out of timber that could just provide a place either at the top or along the way down the slope to sit and rest and really take in that view. You can, on the next slide, you can see that image. I think everyone's pretty familiar with it, but the idea that, you know, you have this, all of a sudden, this really awesome view into this beautiful clearing of mature maples. And so this is a great place to stop and hang out and really take those in, as well as access that trail without eroding the slope. And so, and that's sort of we think a good launch off point to obviously the wonderful natural trails that are interspersed throughout this forested area. So I'm going to stop there. I think that's sort of the overview of the play areas. We are going to get into a Q&A discussion about the different play areas. We do have a couple polling features to get some of your thoughts on some of the topics we've covered tonight. And I think even, I don't know, Jennifer, if we want to go into do a quick Q&A, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to kind of lead us through the next section.
Yeah, we can open it up for some Q&A and maybe give 5 minutes for some Q&A, and then we'll jump into the polls, and then we'll go back into next steps and then follow up with any Q&A after that. So with that, please raise your virtual hand or put comment into the chat, and I will call on you if anyone has any questions or comments. I know one item I would like to just bring up is in looking at the swing, the sample that was shown is bright yellow. That is just a representation. That is not the color of the swing we would actually pick, or the slide. We have not gotten to the granular point of picking colors, but just want to let you know that we will get things that would be less visually impactful.
I did see a comment come through that is great to see. Great to hear there are some kids listening in as well. That's one of the advantages of Zoom, is that we can gather around the dinner table and get feedback on play areas from the users. So thanks for that, sharing that comment.
And I see there's a comment here. Area 5's used by small kids when it snows. Will there still be room to do that with the steps and slide? There should be ample space. We do have a question later regarding the backstop that we would like to ask, but I'm going to hold that because that might actually play into some of that answer there. But great point to know that's a snow hill. Brad Book, I see you have a question.
Actually, I did have a question about the backstop, but I'll wait till later. It sounds like that's more to discuss about that, but kind of wanted to know what the maintenance and longevity of all these wood amenities would be. You know, it's hard to tell whether any of this is finished or natural, or I assume these are all real wood products, and it'd be really interesting to see what the longevity and what the city needs to do to maintain them.
I can start the response on that one. Thanks for bringing that up. So typically these are definitely whole logs, and they're often in the past they were robinia, which is black locust, which is a very durable, long-lived species as a wood product. And this vendor I've noticed has been shifting towards using white oak, which is also a really good hardwood, long-lived wood product that will stand the test of time, that will last a really long time. They're not treated because of that. They can be stained or oiled to have different colors, but they can also be left totally natural, just a silver and gray. I don't have the exact number, but these wood products, especially the structures, are intended to last a similar lifespan as typical play equipment, which might be like 20 years or something like that. Some of the little steppers and more natural elements obviously have a shorter lifespan, because often they're kind of set right into the ground. They might get a little bit wet. They also might not be as they might just get a lot more wear and tear as well. So those become a little bit more worn out over time, I've noticed, compared to the structures, which do have a good lifespan.
And can those be continued to 20 years with enough maintenance, on those ones?
Yeah, I think so. And as far as maintenance, there's really no maintenance for the wood elements unless we wanted to paint them, for instance, or stain them and maintain that stain for aesthetics, for instance. But as far as I mean, there are some other, if you're interested, I have the maintenance and operations manual for these products. I could definitely share some of the tips and tricks they have, but it's in line with standard maintenance levels for play equipment.
Thanks, Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Brad. I guess just to reiterate that, Jeff Watling here, any play equipment we put in, we understand there's a life cycle to it. There's a useful life. And so looking at this type of structure, just to reinforce what Christian said, we understand and see that it's comparable in terms of understanding any play equipment we put in is not, we can expect a 15 to 20, 25 year lifespan before we're having to replace it.
I see we have a couple more hands up. Sally Boyer, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been watching the progress since I think the first meetings, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you for listening to the feedback that's been coming from the neighbors. I know there's still work to do, but I think this really is a big step forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your participation and your kind words. Mary, I see you have your hand up as well. Would you like to unmute and speak?
Yeah, I do. Initially, when you were showing the areas that I think you labeled A, B, and C, people's first choice was B, but B was not including the rock, and it was over by where the blackberry bushes are more. And now it appears that there are going to be 3 impacted areas of the park instead of just 1. And I'm very concerned about that. The other thing is, I don't understand how people with the path that goes down toward the cemetery, if people are going to use that path to get in, where, and you're still not going to allow parking, where are they going to come from? And then the same thing at the top on Mount McKinley. If there's no parking allowed there, how could anyone in a wheelchair even access this to begin with? But my major concern is impacting 3 areas of the park. And somehow I got it in my mind, and I think this was just me, is that you would clear some of that blackberry stuff out. I initially thought that you weren't going to build onto what is the field. I don't know, what is the park now where the grass area is? I thought it was going to be set back more. And I think that was just my mistake. But to impact 3 areas now, I understand that you people that have worked hard on this, I know you've done your best and stuff, but to me, it's not suitable.
We appreciate that feedback as well, Mary. That's important as we, this is not a final design, if you will. So really appreciate that feedback. Thanks.
And I think we also need to remember when looking at accessible paths, it's not only for wheelchairs, but it's for people who are maybe have a broken leg or are using a wheeled scooter or are pushing a cart with two babies in it. You know, there's often times that we all need accessible paths, and making sure we provide access that's safe instead of tripping over tree roots to some of these areas to make the park enjoyable for all users is really what that is. Primary goal is of an accessible route.
Please, I didn't think that it shouldn't be done. I just was trying to figure out how somebody could use it even if there's no parking there. If you, I wasn't trying to suggest that people shouldn't have access. I was just saying, with no parking, as at the other end with no parking, how will people even access that?
Yeah, it's a great point, Mary. And I think as we're planning this park and recognize the use and the function and the role this park plays in the bigger Issaquah Park system, this is a walk-in park. And so I think some of this connectivity that we've certainly heard from the neighborhood is how do we encourage multiple ways to connect to this space from multiple neighborhoods surrounding the 40 acres of Hillside Park. So we're not trying to plan for or anticipate some type of future parking. We're really trying to scale play, and we're trying to scale this neighborhood park to understand it does, when you look at walkability into this space, it supports a lot of neighborhoods on Squawk Mountain. And how do we make sure it supports those walkable spaces to this or walkable neighborhoods to this park well?
I see we have another hand up. Connie, did you have another comment?
This is Connie again. So speaking of walking, which is one of the major uses for this park at this point in time, your original trail map didn't actually show the other trails that exit this park, which hopefully will become part of a trail system. But the new trails that you're adding actually would impact those trails by making them toddler oriented. And I will say a giant schnauzer and toddlers don't necessarily mix well. And so that would actually be an impact to my particular life. Not that it's about me, but you have to know that the multiples of people using those trails don't necessarily interface well with the uses that you are suggesting. And so unless you're providing alternative routes, then you are changing the value of the park to existing users. And then I thought Mary had a great point. What actually is the surface of the trail coming up from the cemetery? Are we going to be able to put a stroller through there? And how would anybody get to these areas outside of McKinley unless they were really snappily mobile, right? I don't know what the surface of the trail you're talking about is. And so I think it would be interesting to actually make it all more surface walkable as compared to play area oriented. Now, I will say the thing that cracked me up the most was, and we will have sticks for kids to play with. And so I was imagining Parks Maintenance having to go and supply an endless quantity of loose material for the kids' construction. So I think some of what you're doing is fun and interesting, but I think a lot of things about the park is you already have the fodder for the kids to do their thing without having to spend the money or create a situation for them to do it. You have the big rock, you have logs, we have things. You just put them down and let the kids do their thing as compared to having it be programmed. It's called nature. I'm not really trying to be sarcastic about it. It's just we all grew up, because I'm ancient now, without having to have our play quite so programmed and false. It would be nice to see the connection be a real connection, right? I don't know if anybody else feels my pain with the concept of we have to cut the perfect log, but there you go. Thank you.
Totally agreed.
Yeah, and I guess we're trying to strike that balance, Connie. All good points. I'd consider myself in that venturing towards the old category too, old school category. But I think the idea of that discovery play area is, it's the boulder, it's the native material, the natural material that's around it. It's not necessarily something we're going to be inventorying and stockpiling sticks. I think it's understanding. Yes, kids love to play in nature, and it doesn't. We're not looking at making a sizable, massive financial investment in that space. I think some of the log areas that were asked about and referred to earlier, and some of the other lower play areas in Area 6. So it's a bit of both, I guess, is what we're trying to achieve.
In respect of time, I didn't see any new hands up. Why don't we jump into doing a poll? And I am going to open the poll and to everyone, and where you see your chat function, you should see your polling function. Does everyone see that? And would like you to vote either yes or no on, do the proposed trail connections meet the community's needs? We'll give a few minutes here. The first one's always kind of the hardest to find. Is everyone finding the poll buttons? Okay. So we've got, I think there's just a couple of attendees that maybe have not participated. I know we have a lot of staff and others on the line here. We'll give just another quick moment. See if there's anyone else who would like to complete. And this is just some initial thoughts and wanting to get some feedback from the community here. So we're not going to use all 5 minutes or else we'd take up the rest of our time. So I am going to go ahead and close the poll. And we received about 7 responses yes, and 5 responses as to no. So with that, I am going to open up our next poll question. And this one is a write-in answer. So we will give you a few minutes to do that. I've opened the poll, and it is, how well do the proposed play concepts balance adding new amenities while preserving the park's natural setting and beauty? And there's no right or wrong answer here. If you want, put thumbs up, good, great, poor, or you want to write a short novella, please feel free to add your comments. We will be saving the responses to this and posting them on the webpage. I see we have about 4 people who have finished, 3 that are in progress. So we'll wait just a few more minutes here. And I will say the open-ended questions are a little more difficult for me to share. So I will be sure to post these responses online for everyone. We've got 3 more responses that are in progress. So if we can get those wrapped up here in maybe the next 30 seconds, we can move on to another poll question and make sure we have enough time for next steps and some last minute Q&A. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and close this poll at this time. Please feel free to send me, you've got copies of this, the presentation's posted to the website. You feel free to email me your responses if you weren't able to complete it all this evening. But with that, I am going to close the poll. And thank you for providing that feedback. Our next poll question is also a short answer write-in. And just want to ask real quick, do you have any additional feedback on any of the specific play elements? I know one of our emailed comments was about equipment color. Just wanted to let you know we have not decided on any color scheme just yet, but we know keeping it natural and not visually impactful is one of them. But please feel free to add any other thoughts, comments you may have, or maybe something we didn't talk about this evening that you would like us to address. I'm going to go silent here while we let you all do your writing.
Jennifer, it won't open the screen.
It didn't?
It just says initial thoughts right now on mine.
Scroll down and see if it's
I can't get it to scroll. I don't know.
Mine is working fine.
Yeah, it's not on the main, the shared screen. Maybe I'll actually, would it be better if I stop sharing so it's easier to see? It should be off to the right side of your screen, Mary.
I think she's on her phone, so it's a little different.
Okay.
No, I'm not. I'm on a computer.
Oh, okay. So on the...
Maybe I'll stop sharing to see if that helps it show up for people.
I can see you now, Amelia, but I can't.
Okay.
Okay. I can't get it. I don't know.
Okay. Should be on the right-hand side, kind of under the chat. There should be the polling.
It was fine before. I can't get it now. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we've got just one more quick poll question. So, Mary, you've got my email. You can
Yeah, I do.
Send me an email if you have any additional feedback you'd like to add, okay? So I see we've got 10 people that have finished, 3 that are in progress. I will give, if those who are in progress could wrap up, that would be great. our next poll question's really quick, so it shouldn't take long. I am going to go ahead and close the poll. So if you're in progress, please complete what you're doing. Great. Thank you all very much for your feedback. I look forward to reading your responses. And then for our final poll question, and Brad, this is the one you were waiting for. When looking at the park, we have a question for you. Should the backstop be replaced with a new backstop, or should it be removed? We want to know what you, the community and neighborhood, think about that.
Sure be nice to have some data or feedback on that, Jennifer, in terms of how much it's actually being used. Is there anything available?
I don't have any feedback on that yet, Brad. So
Brad, this is Jeff. Yeah, you know, as a drop-in space, that's certainly not something that's scheduled. So we wouldn't necessarily have a sort of usage data. It's a great question. I think, you know, some of our thoughts, and again, as we sort of seek feedback over the coming weeks throughout the neighborhood, right? We have this question of, hey, as we're introducing play, as we're looking to improve that play field, knowing how sort of portable fencing, portable goals, portable backstops have come a long ways as a neighborhood, do you want that sort of defined space for the only backstop, or is there interest in just having a general broad play field that could be right, you know, temporary goals or temporary, you know, backstops, portable backstops could be put any one place. So just some, you know, the work on the field creates this opportunity to consider, do we put one back in a very rigid sort of structured way, or do we just allow the field to be uber versatile? So,
well, this is Connie. This question doesn't really get to that conversation. This question doesn't have a don't know or a maybe.
And that's fair. Again, it's not we're not taking a vote that's, you know, we're making a decision based upon the election decision tonight. So feel free to respond or send us an email or.
Well, I'm going to ask a question.
Great, even better.
So when you're looking at creating your drainage, do you need to remove the backstop?
I believe so, as we're needing to do the work, yes.
Okay, well, that would be good information. So the backstop is coming down already.
Yeah, so that's the question, replaced or removed.
Well, you have to remove it in order to put in the drainage. So the question is whether you would then do anything with it, because I don't think I want the 20-year-old backstop put back up again. Do we want a new, improved something put up again? Is a whole different can of worms to me. So, okay, now I know a little more, but
we don't know that we need to remove it.
I'm still not going to answer the question.
I just wanted to clarify, we don't yet know if we need to remove it or if we're able to put the drain on either side of it to capture. So that is detailed design we have yet to do. But for your responses, looked like 6 people voted for replace the backstop, where 4 were for it to be removed. So obviously there's some back and forth on that, and this is just a curiosity question. So with that, thank you all for participating in our poll. We can go ahead and close the polls now and move on to next steps. So, Christian, was this me or were you going to take this? I can take it.
Go for, you're on a roll. So.
All right, let's go. Next steps, we've got an on-site open house this Thursday, May 19th from 5:30 to 7. We are not going to be presenting the exact information that we went over tonight. What we're going to be doing is marking out where these play areas would be, so you could have a in the park sensation as to how big some of these elements might be, and kind of what that impact might be visually, maybe how tall some of the items are. So you don't need to stay for the whole period of time, but you are welcome to come drop in, see what we're up to over there, and that would be great. This is not your only opportunity tonight for feedback. We've got our open house Thursday, and we're going to be taking any comments on materials presented tonight. Please send them to me at jenniferf@issaquah.gov, and we will be compiling those for us. It's our goal to take all the information we receive to come up with a preferred concept to get back out to the community for additional feedback in July. And with that, we want to try and build consensus on a final preferred concept by the end of August. With the wetland and doing detailed design, we do have quite an extensive permitting process that will be ahead of us. So we anticipate starting that permitting process this fall and likely carry into winter and possibly early spring 2023, with our construction anticipated for 2023 construction season. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Would like to open it back up for any Q&A at this time. You all received a copy of this presentation. It is again available on our website, so please feel free to shoot me any comments you have. And with that, I would like to open it back up to any questions or comments. Thank you all very much for your time and input tonight. It has been most helpful.
Yeah, Amelia, you can take down the presentation so we can maybe see everyone or see hands as they come up. That'd be great.
I see Mary has her hand up. Mary, you can unmute.
I don't have my hand up.
Oh, okay. It must have been Connie. Do you have your hand up for additional comment?
I do. It's Connie again, and I had seen somewhere that you were potentially going to have to ask for another monetary hit from City Council. So I would like to understand the costs of all of the different options and how they fit into the funding, and then how it would be funded would be one, because we have done these things in the past and it seems to be hard to get the funding question out in advance of the decision making. And then two, there is the question of, if you build your drainage, I don't think want to build any of your play facilities until you understand whether your drainage functions. So I guess my opinion would be that you would have to go through at least a winter with your drainage in place to see if it works, because I can just see the slide on the hill splashing down into the same water event that we have all winter long anyway. And so you don't want to have to take out anything that you have created in that situation. So in your timeline, I just think you need to be wise. And right now you haven't split the timeline between the work on the wetland and the environment, and also the amount of money it might cost to do what you're going to do for your mitigations, and then the play area. I think they're two sort of separate component projects. And then I have a sort of deep concern, no pun intended, for added water going into the graves that are at this point in time held in the bathtub of the park, but would be instead drained down slope all winter long. Right now, the wetland basically holds the water, and it won't be doing that anymore, because what you're going to have is you're just going to have a flow control, not a control. You're just going to have it from going fast. You aren't going to stop it and hold it in a big bathtub like is currently happening. And right now, we already know when they dig the graves, they're half filled with water as they dig them down there. So I just don't, you're going to have more, a lot more on the whole water situation as it involves the cemetery. And there you go. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Connie. Yeah, I think any drainage design that we're looking at is not going to, it's going to be intended and purposeful to not go into either the upper Hillside Cemetery or lower Hillside Cemetery. I think the situation you're referring to is occurring at the upper Hillside Cemetery, which is not downgrade from this park. But
yes, it
really
is.
appreciate
I'm
that.
sorry, but Jeff, I'm sorry, but it is exactly downgrade from this park. And that's where you've had a water situation that you've had to have Golder do drainage studies around that your little roundabout at the end, because the water percolates out of the ground by the flagpole and sweeps across and then into the graves. So
again, appreciate the feedback, Connie. I'm not trying to debate you. I'm really not. I'm saying we need to be really intentional about that. You're absolutely right.
Right. I just don't want you to think that there is not a water problem there. I have to be.
I'm aware of the water problem.
Okay,
So yeah, absolutely.
I thought I heard you just say there wasn't one. Ah, okay.
No, I didn't. No, I did not say that.
So with that, I do not see any other hands up. Again, I do want to say thank you. It is 7:30. I would want to be truly respectful of everyone's time and appreciate you joining us tonight. So please feel free to sign off, send an email. And again, thank you to the consultant team and all of you residents for joining us today. We really appreciate your feedback, and please keep in touch. There's more to come. So we will be in touch with you soon. So with that, have a great night, everyone.